Connie's hosting a talent contest to find the best characters in the Dreamiverse. But she's a no-nonsense judge, and none of these candidates are up to scratch. Of course, Cuthbert's no use, so let's see if we can come up with something to impress her. Head into the dressing room, also known as edit mode, to get started. In this tutorial, we'll be customizing the appearance of a puppet. So we'll need a blank canvas to start. Go to the Assembly menu and open the Gadgets menu. Now open the Gameplay Gear menu. In here, find the blank Puppet Deluxe. The Deluxe version is the perfect starting point for making characters. Select it with X and a blue mannequin will appear on your imp. It has built-in features like jump and possession animations, which the basic version doesn't have. Connie won't be impressed by a basic puppet, so make sure you select the right one. Stamp the deluxe puppet in the scene with R2 or X. Get its feet roughly on the floor, but make sure they aren't intersecting with it. Then press the circle button to unequip the puppet from your imp. If you need to, you can grab and adjust the puppet with R2. In the next step, we'll start exploring the puppet's inner workings. The puppet might look simple, but it's quite a complex gadget. So let's get to know it a little better. It's made up of many objects that have been grouped together. And just like any other group, it can be scoped into. Hover over the puppet with your imp, press and hold L1, and then press X to scope in. Below the puppet, you will now see its base and its logic microchip. If they're obscured by the floor, you may need to scope out and adjust your puppet's position. The puppet's body is made of sculptures, joined together with connectors. When scoped in, we can grab parts of the puppet to change its pose. Before we do that, find the button called Puppet Mirror in the context menu. Select this button with X, and your puppet will stay symmetrical when you pose it. Of course, you don't have to make it symmetrical, but it's a good way to start. You can always add nuance later. When you move a part of the puppet, all the parts connected to it will also move. The root of the puppet is the pelvis, and every other part is connected in a hierarchy from there. For example, moving the upper arm will move the lower arm and the hand as well. But if you move the pelvis, the whole puppet will move. Its feet will try to stay in contact with the floor. So if you lower the pelvis, the puppet's knees will bend. You can also rotate parts by grabbing them with L2. Use R2 and L2 to create a new pose for the puppet. Changing the pose can be a great starting point for a character. The pose could be confident, sad, scared, or aggressive. Don't forget, You can undo any changes with the left directional button if you make a mistake. Use the grab cam to adjust your pose from different angles. Just hold R1 over the puppet to activate it. When you've finished posing your puppet, move on to the next step. Now we've posed our puppet, we can start adjusting its proportions. To do that, we're going to use the stretch tool. Go to the Assembly menu, then open the Tools menu. Select the stretch tool. It's the one that looks like a double-ended arrow. The stretch tool works like the move tool in a lot of ways. But with the stretch tool, you can move parts of the puppet beyond the limits of the connectors. Try grabbing and moving the puppet's head. Notice the way the neck elongates and shortens. Now try it on the hands. This changes the length of the upper and lower arm. Some body parts respond differently to the stretch tool. For instance, if you move the upper arms, the shoulders will broaden and the chest will expand. You can also scale parts of the puppet using the up and down directional buttons. I'd only recommend doing this to the puppet's extremities though, the head, hands and feet. Puppets are delicate contraptions, and extreme scaling and stretching can make them behave unexpectedly. But if anything does go skew-whiff, just undo it using the left directional button. If you know how to use sculpt mode, you could try scoping into the individual body parts to change their shape. You can find a whole tutorial on sculpting in the art tutorials. Have a play around with stretching and scaling and see what you can create. Try making the puppet more cartoony or turn it into a monster. Test out your puppet in play mode to see it in motion. When you're done, return to edit mode. Rewind time with L3 to get your puppet back in position. In the next step, I'll show you how to color and stylize your puppet. Another way of customizing your puppet's appearance is by changing its color. We can do this by tinting it in coat mode. If you've played my tutorial on coat, style and effects, you'll already know how to do this. In the Assembly menu, go to the Modes menu and enter Coat Mode. In the Coat Mode menu, open the Colors menu and select a color for your puppet. Now hover over your puppet and hold R2 to tint it with your selected color. The longer you hold R2, the stronger the tint will become. If you want your puppet to be multicolored, simply scope into the puppet. Select a different color from the Colors menu. Hover your imp over a part of the puppet you want to tint. How about the head? Now, when you press and hold R2, just that part of the puppet will be tinted. You can also use the tools in Style mode and Effects mode. Try using Style mode to change the texture of your puppet. If you don't know how to use Style mode, there's an art tutorial which can help you. In the next step, we'll dive into the dressing up box. One of the simplest ways to customize a puppet is by adding accessories. But to make sure they move with the puppet, we need to group them with a body part. Before we do that, it's important to fully understand the concept of scoping in and out of groups and objects. If you've played part 4 of the Start Dreaming tutorials, then you'll already know a thing or two about using groups. Objects in dreams are often combined into groups, which can be treated like a single object in assembly mode. Groups themselves can also be grouped. This means that you can have groups nested inside other groups. Let's try scoping in and out of something else before we invade the puppet's personal space. Over there on the floor is a hat box. Make sure you're in edit mode. Now try taking the lid off the hat box. The whole box will move because the lid, the box, and its contents have been grouped. Undo the move with the left directional button to put it back in its place. Now scope into the group. Hover over the hat box, press and hold L1 and press X. Everything but the box should go grey and blurry. If not, make sure your visual feedback preference is set to all. This shows that you've scoped into the group and can edit its contents. Now, you should be able to take the lid off the hat box. Inside is another hat box. Try taking the lid off this one. I think you can guess what will happen. This smaller hat box is also grouped with its lid and contents. Remove the smaller box and place it next to the large one. Now scope into this group by holding L1 and pressing X over the smaller hat box. The original hat box will go grey and blurry as we've scoped into a subgroup. Now you should be able to open the smaller hat box. What's inside? A lovely hat! Take it out and place it next to the smaller box. When you've done that, proceed to the next step. Now that we've taken the hat out of the box, let's try putting it on our puppet. First, we need to scope out of this group. To do that, simply hold L1 and press circle. That takes us back into the large hat box group. Now scope out again into the main scene by holding L1 and pressing circle. Pick up the hat. Ah, we seem to have a bit of a problem here. The hat is still inside the nested groups, even though it's outside the hat box. When you scope in and out, only you and your imp are moving in and out of objects or groups. Unless you're carrying something with you. Scope back into the large hat box group, and then into the smaller hat box group to get the hat. Now grab and hold the hat with R2, and scope out of both groups with L1 and circle while holding the hat. If you've done it correctly, you should be back in the main scene. With a hat you can now move independently of the boxes. That's because scoping in and out of a group whilst holding an object adds or removes it from that group. Hurrah! Now we can put it on the puppet. Grab the hat, hover over the puppet, then hold L1 and press X to scope into the puppet with the hat. Now scope into the puppet's head while still holding the hat. This is a shortcut for grouping two objects if you're already grabbing one of them. Simply grab an object and scope into another object to group them automatically without having to select them. The same way that scoping into a group while holding an object adds it to the group. Now that it's in a group with the head, place the hat where you want it. Remember to check it from different angles using the grab cam to make sure it's in position. Press R2 softly to nudge if you need to make fine adjustments to the position of the hat. Before you move on, you should try out the puppet to see it walk around with its new accessory. Switch to play mode, possess it with R2, and take it for a wander. Nice. When you're ready to continue, go back to edit mode. Going to play mode and back to edit mode will scope you out of any groups. Remember to rewind time with L3 to get your puppet back in position. Then go to the next step. Okay, let's add some more accessories before our puppet's stage debut. Open the assembly menu and select Search, the button with the magnifying glass, to search for an element. Usually, you'd be in the Dreamiverse here, but for this tutorial, I've kept things simple and curated a collection of elements for you to use. Take a look at some of the accessories in the collection. Select one you like with X. You'll now have your chosen accessory on your imp. Don't stamp it down yet though. First we need to scope into the puppet. You can do this even when you have an element from the Dreamiverse on your imp. Scope in with L1 and X, and then scope into the body part that you want to attach it to. If that body part is already in its own group, you'll enter that group. But if the body part is just a sculpture, then you'll create a new group when you stamp the object down. Once the accessory is in the group, you can adjust the accessory while you're there. Try adding some more accessories from the collection. Then it's important to test the puppet in play mode to check that the accessory is attached correctly. Here's another very important tip. If you ever want to remove an accessory Whatever you do, don't ungroup the body part. If you do that, you'll delete that group's connection to the puppet. And without the connector, your puppet's limbs will start falling off when you go into play mode. And nobody wants that. Instead, scope into the group containing the body part and the accessory. Then either delete the accessory or grab it and scope out. If there's only one object left in the group, it'll automatically ungroup, and the connector will remain safely connected to the remaining object. Play around with the things you've learned in this tutorial and have fun making a character. When you're happy, select the star podium from the tutorial collection and stamp it down in the outline that we've put in the scene for you. Then head back into play mode, jump onto the podium and see what Connie thinks of your creation. Then head back into play mode, jump onto the podium and see. When you're happy, select the star podium from the tutorial collection and stamp it down in the outline that we've put in the scene for you. Then head back into play mode, jump onto the podium and see what Connie thinks of your creation. Oh dear, it looks like Cuthbert is really stuck this time. In previous tutorials, you've edited the scene to help Connie reach Cuthbert. But this time, you'll be editing Connie herself, supercharging her with some new abilities to get past the obstacles in the scene. Bear in mind that this is a complex tutorial in which it's easy to make a mistake. If you do, remember to use the left directional button to undo. Now go into play mode and see how far you can get. Possess Connie with R2 and press the X button to jump. Oops, she can't even get over the first obstacle. So let's start by souping up her jump height. Switch back to edit mode and we'll get started. To change Connie's jump height, all we need to do is tweak her. So hover over her, hold L1 and press the square button to open her tweak menu. This is a puppet tweak menu. As you can see, it's jam-packed with different options. Thankfully, the setting we want is on the first page. All these settings control Connie's overall movement. We could make Connie run super fast or super slow. But nah, that's not going to help her. A nice high jump is what we need. What do we have here? This slider controls Connie's jump height. Hover over it with your imp and hold X to grab it. Move your imp to adjust the slider to around 3 meters. That should be enough to get over that stack of blocks. The Puppet Tweak menu also has some really useful testing controls. Click R3 to start time, and Connie will come to life. See what happens now if you hover your imp over the jump height slider. You can preview the jump, so you can get it to the perfect height without having to test it in play mode. Actually, I think you should dial it back to 2.5 meters, or she might overshoot the jump. You can make small adjustments to sliders by using the up and down directional buttons. Hover over the slider and use the down directional button to adjust the setting. Feel free to explore some of the other settings in the menu. If you're not sure what a button or slider does, just hover over it for a few seconds and a more info tip will pop up to explain. You can even adjust the strength of gravity on her jump. Turn it down a bit to make her jump more floaty. When you've got Connie's jump the way you want it, give it a test run in play mode. See how far Connie can get now, then move on to the next step when you're ready to continue. Well, that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, Connie's new jumping skills aren't going to be much use on the next obstacle. And don't even think about making her jump over the top, because that force field will zap her in a second. Instead, let's give Connie the power to crouch. I bet she's always dreamed of it. If you're still in play mode, switch back to edit mode now. Rewind time with L3 to put Connie back at the start. To give her a crouch, we need to scope into her. Puppets are made up of sculptures, connectors, and gadgets that are grouped together. Hover over Connie, press and hold L1, then press X to scope in. When you've scoped into a puppet, you can see its inner workings. On Connie's back, there's a microchip gadget. It's called Connie's brain, and it contains all her logic and animations. Let's take a look inside. Hold L1 and press X over it to scope in and open the microchip canvas. There's quite a lot going on in here. The gadget I want you to look at is this one in the bottom right corner with the diamond icon. This is a keyframe gadget. If you've played through the Keyframes and Timelines tutorial, you'll already know all about these. Keyframes record changes to things in the scene. They store those changes in a gadget, which can be triggered using logic. This keyframe contains a crouching pose for Connie. Select the keyframe with X, and you'll see a preview of how it looks. Those dashed lines over Connie show that she's being changed by the keyframe. Press circle to deselect the keyframe and she goes back to normal. To be able to activate the crouch keyframe, we need to connect it to Connie's controller sensor. Then you'll be able to make her crouch with a controller button. In the next step, I'll show you how to do exactly that. To activate the crouch, we're going to connect it to Connie's controller sensor. If you've closed her microchip, scope back into her and then scope into the microchip to open it up again. The controller sensor is the large gadget on Connie's microchip. It has a controller icon on it. Open up its tweak menu with L1 and square. Now you have a microchip and a tweak menu open, you may need to arrange them on the screen. Make sure that the controller sensor and its tweak menu stay to the left. This is because they generate signals, and signals flow through gadgets from left to right in Dreams. You can also save the 3D space position of tweak menus and microchips, or pin them to the screen, using the buttons that appear at the top when hovering over the canvas. This will help you keep them tidy while you're editing logic, which is very important as it's easy to make mistakes. Now, let's take a closer look at that controller sensor. Ah, look, controller buttons. Just what we need. All playable characters contain a controller sensor gadget like this one. but the gadget can also be used for any situation where you want to detect button presses. To assign our keyframe to a button, we just need to wire it to the controller sensor. We won't use a circle button as that depossesses Connie, and X makes her jump. So how about the square button to crouch? Make sure you can see the keyframe on the microchip. Move the tweak menu with R2 if you need to. If you hover over the square button in the controller sensor menu, you'll see ports appear on either side of it. They're just like the ports you see on gadgets. Ports on the left are inputs, and ports on the right are outputs. Now, you need to be very precise for the next part, as it's easy to make a mistake. Carefully hover your imp over the output port of the square button, and press X to create a wire. Stretch that wire over to the keyframe, and connect it to the power port on the bottom of the gadget with X. If at any time you make a mistake, just undo it using the left directional button. Once your crouch move is all wired up, close the controller sensor tweak menu. Hover over it, hold L1, then press circle to close. Now try out Connie's new crouch in play mode. See if she can make it under the second obstacle. When you're ready to continue, go back to edit mode. Rewind time with L3 and start the next step. Right. We're on to the final obstacle. There's no way around it, but it looks destructible. So we're going to make a slam attack for Connie so that she can smash through it. We'll start by recording a pose for the slam. We can do this using a keyframe. Scope back into Connie and open up her microchip if it isn't already open. If you've played my keyframes and timelines tutorial, you'll have a bit of a head start on this next part. Go to the assembly menu and open the animate menu. Select the keyframe with X. You'll now have a keyframe gadget on your imp. Stamp it somewhere in the scene with R2 or X. The keyframe records changes you make to objects and settings in the scene. It starts recording as soon as you stamp it. You can tell it's recording because your imp will change shape and colour. Now that we're recording, grab Connie's upper body with R2 and drag it gently down to the floor. Because we're scoped into her, we can move her body parts individually to create a pose. If we weren't scoped in, we'd move Connie's whole body. Notice that her knees automatically bend. Make sure her cone is all the way down to the floor so that you can't see her legs. Keyframes can record changes to anything, even tweak menu settings. So, just for visual flair, let's also make her glow. Hover over Connie's cone, hold L1 and press square to open its tweak menu. Because we're scoped in, this opens the tweak menu for the sculpture itself, rather than the puppet. All the settings on this page change the way Connie's cone looks. Look for the glow slider on the first page. Its icon is a sun. Raise the glow up to about 40%. Once you've set the glow, select Stop Recording in the context menu to store the changes to the keyframe. You can close the tweak menu now too. Just hover over it, hold L1 and press circle. Select the keyframe gadget with X to preview what's been recorded. Looks good. Deselect the keyframe by pressing circle. In the next step, we'll continue building Connie's slam attack. The next step is to place our new Connie animation into a timeline. Using a timeline will let us time the animations and effects of the slam attack. Go to the Assembly menu and back to the Animate menu. Select the timeline with X. Hover over Connie's microchip and stamp a timeline above the crouch keyframe. Now let's open the timeline canvas with L1 and X. The slam attack should be a really quick animation. So adjust the canvas so it's only 1 second long. Any longer and it won't feel snappy enough. Hover over the edge of the timeline canvas so that a white line appears along it. You'll also see a white double-ended arrow appear next to the edge by your imp. When you see this, grab the edge of the canvas with X. Move your imp to shorten the timeline to 1 second. Make sure you don't select the trim button by mistake. It's a square button by the numbers at the top of the timeline. It has a black arrow on it. The timeline duration is now correct, but the space is very small. So let's zoom in a bit. Hover your imp over the timeline canvas, hold L1 and press the right directional button to zoom in. This will keep the timeline duration to 1 second long, but stretch the space so that you can fit more detail into it. If you need to zoom out, just hold L1 and press the left directional button. Now let's put our slam attack keyframe onto the timeline. Grab the keyframe with R2 and place it at the start of the timeline canvas. Make sure you've got the slam keyframe and not the crouch one. The gadget automatically snaps to the surface of the canvas. The keyframe is only a fraction of a second long at the moment, but we need it to fill the length of the timeline. So hover over the keyframe and hold the up directional button to scale it. Make it the same length as the timeline. Now we want to wire the timeline up to a button press, just like we did with the crouch. Move the timeline canvas so that you can see the controller sensor and the timeline gadget. Open the controller sensor tweak menu with L1 and square. I'm going to use L1 as the slam attack button. Hover over the output port of the L1 button and press X to create a wire. Stretch the wire down to the timeline gadget and connect it to the power port on the bottom. You can now use the L1 button to perform Connie's slam attack. Give it a try in play mode. At the moment, it's just an animation, so it's not going to do anything to the blocks. But in the next step, I'll show you how to add some force to it. When you're ready to continue, return to edit mode, rewind time, and start the next step. The slam attack animation is all set up, but it's not doing much besides looking cool, so we need to add a gadget to our timeline that will emit a force when Connie slams the ground. The gadget we're going to use for this is the force applier. Go to the Assembly menu and open the Gadgets menu. Find the Move as an Output menu and open it with X. The icon for the force applier looks like a gust of wind. Select it with X to equip it to your imp. I hope you've still got the timeline open. If not, open it with L1 and X. Stamp the force applier onto the timeline canvas below the keyframe. Press circle to unequip the force applier from your imp. The force applier isn't very strong by default, so we'll need to tweak it. To open its tweak menu, hover over the gadget, hold L1 and press square. At the top of the tweak menu is the Force Strength slider. Its icon is a beefy arm. Drag it all the way up to 100% using your imp. That will ensure the force emitted will overcome the gravity in the scene and the friction between the blocks. Next, increase the force speed to 10 meters per second. That will give the slam attack some punch. If you take a look at Connie, you'll see a green zone around her. Anything in this zone will be affected by the force applier. At the moment, the zone isn't much bigger than Connie. Hover your imp over the zone and arrow gizmos will appear. Grab them with R2 and move your imp to change the size of the zone. Or you can scale the zone more precisely in the Force Applier Tweak menu. Go to the tab called Zone Size. Grab the zone size slider with X and set it to about 3.5 meters. OK, let's test out Connie's new powers. Switch over to Play mode. Possess Connie and give her new slam attack a try. Oops! Looks like it's more power than Connie can handle. The force applier is pushing her off the platform. Switch back to Edit mode and rewind time. In the final step, I'll show you how to tweak the force applier so that it only affects the objects we want it to. To prevent the force applier from pushing Connie off the platforms, we're going to use labels. Scope back into Connie and open up her microchip. Open the timeline canvas with L1 and X. Now tweak the force applier with L1 and square. Labels can be given to any object in the scene, and gadgets like the force applier can detect them. In the Force Applier Tweak menu, go to the Labels tab. By default, it will detect all labels. There are labels for all sorts of objects: foes, scenery, targets. The friend label is used for playable characters like Connie or friendly characters like Cuthbert. So if we deselect it, the force applier will no longer affect Connie. Hover over the friend button and press X to deselect it. It's the button with the heart icon. Now Connie should be able to blast through the blocks without firing herself off into space. Use her new skills to pass all the obstacles. And you can use your new skills to create some characters for your scenes. When you've successfully rescued Cuthbert, go through the door to finish this tutorial.
Hi, I'm Mark, Creative Director of Media Molecule, and I'm going to present a simple masterclass that will hopefully help you use some of what so far and turn that into an entire game. I'm going to be focusing on a remix of the Dreamiverse Dash game. That means take a copy of something, mess around with it, which is always a really good way to learn. I will be reiterating some of the basics that you may have already learnt, but basics make for strong foundations, and strong foundations make for strong structures. Yes. So, first of all, try playing the game, get familiar with it, and when you get past the finish line, we'll dive in and start tinkering. Okay, let's start by making sure we feel comfortable navigating the space. So here's a quick reminder of how we do this. If you feel you're already a master at camera controls, then you can skip this step. Use the left stick to move forwards, backwards, left or right. Use the right stick to look in a different direction. If I hold down L1, I can now use the left stick to move up and down instead of forward and backward. We use the L1 button a lot to alter the functionality of other buttons, much like a shift key on a computer keyboard. So if you ever hear me accidentally say shift, you'll know I mean L1. This level is pretty large, and it's pretty slow using this method if you want to get to the other side of the track, for example. So let's remind ourselves of some quicker ways of moving around. If I position my imp tip over a place I want to go, I can hold down L1 and tap R1. This will zip us there in an instant. Finally, another useful method is to position your imp tip over a place you want to go to, just like before, except this time hold R1, which will lock your imp onto whatever you are hovering over. You can now use the left stick to zoom in and out and the right stick to orbit around the point you grabbed. You are hovering over. The useful method is to position your imp tip there in an instant of moving around. If I position my imp tip over a place I want to go, I can hold down L1 and tap R1. This will zip us there in an instant you are hovering over. You can now use the left stick to zoom in and out and the right stick to orbit around the point you grabbed. Using this method, you can also use the motion sensor in your controller by physically moving the whole thing to orbit around the point you grabbed. This is a very nice method once you get used to it. Have a go. It's worth spending time with these techniques until you feel comfortable moving around. When you feel you're getting the hang of it, click the big arrow and we'll do the next step. Okay, you should be confident about moving around with camera controls now, so let's start changing the actual scene. Before we do that though, you may have noticed lots of these little bright cubes scattered around. These are gadgets. We don't need to see them for now, so let's hide them. Go to the menu, find the Show Hide button, and make sure electronics are turned off. That'll make things a bit clearer. Okay, let's start changing the track layout. In this step, I'll be talking about deleting, moving, and cloning. If you feel you're already a master of these techniques, then feel free to skip this step. A really easy thing to do is just delete some bits. Position your imp tip over a module. You'll see it highlight to show which thing you're over, and then you can simply press the triangle button to delete it. You'll also find a delete tool in the menu. Remember, use the square button to show or hide the menu. In the Tools menu, you'll find the Delete tool, but I suggest you try to remember the shortcut buttons. It will make for a far more fluid experience, and this is a masterclass after all. Sometimes you'll notice these little white outlines that remain. These were added as an artistic choice using Paint mode after the various track modules were placed. If you want to learn more about painting, then check out the art tutorials. But for now, feel free to just delete them if you wish. It won't affect how the scene plays either way. And remember, you can use the left and right directional buttons to undo or redo your actions. We can also really easily move any of the pieces in the scene. Move is the default tool for the imp in edit mode. You'll know the imp has this tool equipped by the icon on its tip. You should see these 4 arrows. If you see something else, then you have another tool equipped, but you can easily lose it by pressing the circle button to get back to the Move tool. So, to move something, position the imp tip over the bit you want to move, then press and hold R2 to grab it. Now you can move it. Note that you can still use the sticks to navigate the scene while holding an object. You can also select a bunch of things using the X button, and then move or delete them all at the same time. Just press X on each bit you want to select, or hold down X and swipe over all the bits you want to select. Press the circle button to unselect everything you've selected. Cloning things in the scene is a quick and easy way to start adding things. To do this, simply hold down L1. Remember, we treat L1 like a shift key on a computer keyboard. Then grab using R2 as before and move it. This will make a copy. To try out any of the changes you make, press the Options button to bring up the Options menu and select the Play Mode icon. Then we can test what we've just done. Press the Options button again and select Edit Mode to go back and make more changes. When coming back into Edit Mode from testing your scene, you can choose to rewind time so that everything is back in its starting state and the character is back in the starting position. So just press this button in the menu or use the L3 button for a shortcut. But you don't have to rewind time when you come back into Edit Mode. Sometimes it's useful to make modifications as you go along, switch back into Play Mode and carry on from where you left off. I suggest you have a little practice. Modify the scene a bit, move some things, copy some things, clone some things. And when you feel confident, we'll go on to the next step. Hello again. I know some of you out there like to be all neat and tidy, line things up, keep things at right angles, etc. If this is you, then you can use the various guides to make you feel less itchy. Grid Snap is most useful for this. Look in the menu under Guides. Turn on Grid Snap with X, and then you can make the grid coarser or finer. Now, when you move an object, you'll see that it snaps to a grid. Turning on Obey Auto Guides will also help with moving and placing stuff. It literally means behave as you do in the home space. Depending on which item you select, it will try to make it easier to place for you. This behavior is determined by the creator. Turning on Obey Auto Guides will also help with moving and placing stuff. It literally means behave as you do in the home space. Depending on which item you select, it will try to make it easier to place for you. This behavior is determined by the creator of each individual item, with a gadget we'll discuss elsewhere. In most cases, it will make the object align to the surface of other objects. Go ahead, have a practice at using the guides, then when you're ready, we'll move on to the next step. So, let's add some new objects to the scene without using the clone tool. If you can't see your menu, remember to press the square button to make it appear. For some new objects, we'll need to go and search the Dreamiverse. Do that by clicking this button on the assembly menu. You can go looking for whatever you want, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll stick to the Dreamiverse collection. So make sure you're in there. Go in and choose a bounce pad with X. You can now stamp some objects into the scene using either X or R2, whichever you prefer. Let's turn on Obey Auto Guides, so it's easier to put these things on the floor. Go to the menu, select Guides, then Obey Auto Guides. Let's get another object, a balloon. Now, make sure all the guides are off and stamp a balloon in the air. Before I stamp it though, note that I can rotate it using the touchpad. Just slide your finger on the touchpad in different directions to rotate it. While we're on the subject of rotating, let me show some other ways to do this. Try grabbing something by holding R2, then use the touchpad to rotate it, just like we did before we stamped the balloon. Another way is to grab and hold with L2 instead of R2. You can now rotate the object using the motion sensor by physically rotating your controller. Note that it rotates around the point you grabbed with the imp tip. And finally, using the L2 grab method, you can also use the left and right sticks to rotate. If you rotate using the left and right sticks like this, the gyro method, by which I mean using the motion sensor, will be disabled until you re-grab. So go ahead, try putting some new elements into the scene. Once you're comfortable with this, you know all you need to know to go off and put some new scenes together. Go to Dream Shaping, start a new game scene, and use other people's objects and characters you find in the Dreamiverse. This will get you a long way. If you feel like learning some more though, stick around and hit Next when ready. So, by now you know how to build a scene from scratch. But let's explore a really quick and easy way to add some movement and bring your scenes to life. Let's animate a part of the track using Dream's very own special version of motion capture. Make sure time is paused and that you have rewound the scene. First off, find something you feel could do with a bit of movement in it. Then grab it with R2 and practice the movement you'd like it to do. Remember, you can use the left directional button to undo if you accidentally leave it in an odd place. Don't be too precious right now. We'll learn how to be more precise later on. Let's just get something moving to learn the principle. Okay, when you feel you've got a good idea of what movement you're going to do, open the menu with the square button, find the Animate button, and grab yourself an action recorder. You'll now have an action recorder gadget on the end of your imp. You may notice that all other gadgets in the scene have appeared, if you'd previously hidden them. We want to see gadgets now, so this is all fine. Stamp it into the scene with the X button. You can move this later if you like, just put it out of the way for now, in the corner for example. This object will capture and store the performance you are about to make. Once you've placed it, it will be armed and ready to start recording. But don't panic. It isn't actually recording yet. Take your time, breathe. Only when you grab the item you want to move will the recording start. So let's do it. Remember, it will only record while you are actually grabbing something, unless you have time running already. So you can let go, have a cough or a sneeze for example, then re-grab and carry on adding more movement if you like. If you feel that you want to start again, just hit the retake button. You'll have a fresh recording attempt. When you feel you're happy enough, press the stop recording button to finish capturing your moves. Congratulations! You just officially became an animator. Start time using this button, or use the R3 shortcut, and hey presto, movement. By default, things animated with this technique will loop forever. If you want to learn more about animating, then check out the animation tutorials. Now, not only do you know how to collage a scene together, you can animate it too. So there's really nothing to stop you making some great platforming style games now. Go on, have a go. Press next to learn about some more exciting stuff. Hello again. Let's get a bit deeper now. Assuming you haven't gone triangle button mad and deleted everything in the scene, there will be some objects in there that you can modify in ways other than just deleting them or moving them. Let's find one of these bounce pads for example. Let's turn on electronics as we want to look at those now. If they aren't already visible, then go to the Show Hide on the menu and make sure electronics are turned on. Notice if you hover over the object you animated, you will see the path that it follows, and the gadget the animation is in will throb. You can delete the gadget with the triangle button if you want, or leave it. It's up to you. Position your imp's tip over the object and select it with X. You'll then see these contextual buttons appear. This bounce pad isn't actually a single object. It's a few objects that have been grouped together. But we can go into this group to mess around with the individual members of it, much like going into a folder on a computer. Press this button to scope into the group. You'll notice everything else go grey and blurred, except the things in the group. Yes, some of these things are still colourful. They're a special case, which we'll ignore for now. Pressing the Hide Everything Else button will make it super clear what is in this group, as it will hide everything else. We are now scoped into this bounce pad, and you'll notice that a gadget has appeared which was invisible before. Gadgets will hide themselves unless you are in the same scope as them. There are exceptions to this, but we don't need to concern ourselves with those right now. So you can go back or leave this scope by pressing this button in the corner. You can also use a shortcut to scope in and out. Hover over the object, hold L1 and tap X. This will take us in. Holding L1 and tapping circle button will take us out. In, out, in, out. Shake it all about. So, make sure you are in the bounce pad scope. You should see this gadget, a microchip. You can recognise a microchip by this little symbol. We can look inside the guts of a microchip by either selecting it with X and using the Open Microchip button, or by holding L1 and tapping X. This will tunnel us into the microchip and reveal some of its inner workings on its circuit board. It's possible you may be looking at the back of the circuit board when you first open it. If that happens, then simply move your camera to look at it from a better position. Or you can also use the L1 plus R1 trick on the circuit board to quickly zip to a better viewing position. We won't concern ourselves right now with everything on this circuit board. Let's just try changing the value on this slider using X. This will affect how high the bounce pad sends the character. Try ramping it up, and then switch to play mode to try it out. Remember, you've only changed one bounce pad though, not all of them, so try to remember which one you changed. Come back into edit mode and locate the bounce pad microchip that you left open. You can close a circuit board by pressing this little button in the corner, or by hovering the imp tip over the board itself and pressing the L1 and circle button shortcut. But feel free to leave it open if you wish. You can happily scope out of the bounce pad but leave the circuit board open. You won't need to scope in now to change the slider, but once closed, you'll have to scope in again to see the microchip and open it up. Lots of the items in this scene have a circuit board with a slider or two on them. So hunt around the scene, scope in, find them, experiment. Come back when you feel ready to learn some more. Did you come across any camera pointers or trigger zones in your explorations yet? No? Then let's find one. There should be one right near the start gate. Assuming you haven't deleted them all, they look like this. This is a trigger zone, and this is a camera pointer. Notice that when you hover your imp tip over either of these gadgets, a wire will appear. This shows us that they're connected to each other. A trigger zone is a way of saying, when something enters a certain area, do something. In this case, the trigger zone activates the camera pointer. When the cone character is in the trigger zone, a camera pointer will force the camera to look in a defined direction. If you select the trigger zone with the X button, then you'll see the area that it cares about. You might need to zoom out a bit to see it fully. If you position your imp tip over the green zone, you'll see that arrows appear. These show us that we can change the dimensions of the area. Just hold down R2 and drag. Press the circle button to deselect the trigger zone. There is another way to change the parameters of a trigger zone that gives you more control, but I'll save that for another time. We'll keep it simple for now. If you now select the camera pointer, you'll see some arrows appear. These show you the way the gadget wants to make the camera look. If you grab the camera pointer gadget by holding L2 instead of R2, you'll be able to change the defined angle. Use either the sticks or motion sensor. Let's look over here, and we'll see a trigger zone that has multiple wires coming off it. We can trace these wires to see what they are connected to. Handy little tip. If you use the L1 plus R1 trick on a wire, it'll take you to the other end of it. Very handy. We can see that we are connected to this large microchip. We'll take a look in there later. The other two wires are connected to camera pointers. If there's more than one camera pointer connected to a trigger zone, then the camera will blend between the two defined angles, based on how close the character is to each one. It's also worth noting, if you have a camera pointer in a scene that isn't connected to a trigger zone, then it will be on each one. More than one camera pointer connected to a trigger zone, then the camera will blend between the two defined angles. More than one camera pointer can see that we are connected to this large microchip. We'll take a look in there later. You can see that we little tip. If you use the L1 plus R1 trick on a wire, it'll take you to the other end of it. Very handy. We can see that we are connected to this large microchip. We'll take a look in there later. The other two wires are connected to camera pointers. If there's more than one camera pointer connected to a trigger zone, then the camera will blend between the two defined angles, based on how close the character is to each one. It's also worth noting, if you have a camera pointer in a scene that isn't connected to a trigger zone, then it will be on all the time and take away a player's ability to manually control the camera angle. When you feel you've understood trigger zones and camera pointers, why not try adding your own somewhere? You'll find the bits you need under Gadgets in the menu. Trigger zones live in Sensors and Input, and camera pointers live in Cameras and Lighting. Simply stamp them into the scene and connect them like so. Grab this little port with X or R2 and connect it to the power port on the camera pointer. Have a little play, and when you feel you've got it, we can move on to the next step. Okay, let's start messing around with some other stuff. First of all, if you haven't already found it, find the big microchip labelled Level Logic. You see this little symbol down here? Remember, this tells us that this is indeed a microchip and has some exciting stuff inside to look at. To take a look inside, we can select it and press the Open Microchip button, or hover over it with your imp tip, hold L1 and press X. This will reveal the guts of the microchip. Don't be put off by the word microchip, by the way. It's just like a cupboard. You can put stuff in it and it helps to keep things neat and tidy. You can close it again by clicking the close icon or by holding L1 and pressing the circle button, either on the chip itself or on the revealed circuit board. So let's take a look at what this microchip contains. First of all, we have a sun and sky gadget. This will let us change some parameters regarding the sun and sky. So let's do that. But first, remember how I said microchips have this symbol on the corner, like this? Well, we can see the sun and sky gadget, which looks very similar to a microchip, doesn't have the symbol. This isn't like a cupboard. This is more like a cup in a cupboard. Are you keeping up with me? Feel free to go and get a cup of tea. It's pretty simple. There are microchips and gadgets. Microchips have this little symbol, gadgets don't. Why am I going on about this, I hear you say? Well, to get inside a microchip, as I've already said, we can use the L1 and X shortcut. But to see what delights a gadget has to offer, we use a different shortcut. We use L1 and square button, often referred to as tweaking. Or, of course, you can simply select it and use the tweak button on the context menu. Why not use the same button for opening a microchip and a gadget, I hear you say? Good question. I'm going to answer that. Microchips can be both opened up and tweaked. If you use the tweak shortcut on a microchip, L1 and square remember, then you'll get the microchip's tweak menu, not its circuit board. On a microchip's tweak menu, you can change its colour and the icon it displays, amongst other things. You'll care more about this when you start making your own microchips, but for now we'll just close this. I thought it was worth showing you, as it's inevitable you'll accidentally open a chip's tweak menu when you meant to open its circuit board. But no need to worry, you'll soon get used to it. So, anyway, let's tweak this sun and sky gadget. L1 plus square button. Notice that if I move the camera around, the tweak menu will follow me. This is their default behaviour. If you prefer it not to do that, then simply press this little button here, and it will sit in the world. This tweak menu has 2 pages. First page controls the sun brightness and colour, etc. But let's look on the second page. Select this tab by pressing the X button with the imp tip. By holding down the X button and dragging these sliders, you can change the colour and brightness of the sky. I can grab the whole menu by holding down R2 if I want to move it to see more clearly. Remember, X button to change something on a tweak menu, R2 to grab and move the whole menu. Let's change a few sliders and see what happens. Now let's take a look at this grade and effects gadget. These apply effects and colours to the whole screen. Have a little muck around, test it out in play mode, and if you're feeling really ambitious, these apply effects and Now let's take a look at this grade and effects gadget. These apply effects and colours to the whole screen. Have a little muck around, test it out in play mode, and if you're feeling really ambitious, why not try hooking up a trigger zone to a grade or sky gadget and see what happens? Note that if you have more than one grade or sky gadget in a scene, and they are active at the same time, they will average out their settings with the other gadgets of the same type. When you're ready, come back for the final step in this masterclass. So let's finish up by looking in this gadget here, Global Settings. Remember, L1 plus square button to get at its tweak menu. We can use this to set how strong gravity is in the scene, for example. Be sure to tick this button on or it will ignore the setting. As for the rest of the stuff in here, feel free to take a look inside. I won't go into detail, we've covered enough for one tutorial, but just to give you an overview, let's skim over them. This chip handles a firework display at the end of a race. This one hides the finish gate until you're halfway around the track, to stop players cheating. But you could solve that with careful scene design, or simply not having a looping track, for example. This chip handles the music, and it's a rather fancy way of doing things. It does different things depending on whereabouts in the race you are, but you can just stamp a simple piece of music into the scene if you like, job done. Or have no music at all, of course. This chip here puts up some simple text instructions, and finally some more audio stuff. a simple mixer. Again, you don't need to use any of this stuff, but in future, as you get more professional about things, you may really want to. So, that wraps up this masterclass. I hope it's taught you something useful. You now know everything you need to start making new scenes. Why not go and try making a new game scene from scratch in dream shaping? Find some objects and a character, maybe a piece of music, and publish it. Go on, I dare you. And publish it. Go on, I dare you.
Here's where you come to customize your imp. This is just a small selection. There will be lots more soon. Dream surfing. Here we can explore the wilds of the Dreamiverse, slipping and sliding through the strangest and most wonderful ideas and creations. Lose yourself in the kaleidoscope of games, animations, music videos, and all sorts of worlds and experiences made by dreamers just like you. Dream surfing is a never-ending, ever-changing stream of dreamers' imaginations. Let's try it out.
rifle and shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. When his 10-year-old son came to investigate the commotion, the father shot him too. His 6-year-old daughter had the good sense to hide in the bathroom, but reports suggest he lured her out by telling her it was just a game. The girl was found shot once in the chest from point-blank range. The mother, who he shot in the stomach, was pregnant at the time. Police arriving on scene after neighbors called 911 found the father in his car listening to the radio. Several days before the murders, neighbors say they heard the father repeating a sequence of numbers in a loud voice. They said it was like he was chanting some strange spell. There was another family shot to death in the same state last month, and in December last year, a man used a rifle and meat cleaver to murder his entire family. In each case, the perpetrators were fathers. State police say this string of domestic homicides appears unrelated, though it could be part of a larger trend such as employment, child care, and other social issues facing the average family. On a Sunday afternoon. The day of the
what you looking at? Want some, do ya? Have some of that. Bish, bash, push. What you looking at? Have some of that. You, what you looking at? Want some, do ya? Have some of that. Bish, bash, push. What you looking at? Have some of that. You, what you looking at? Want some, do ya? Have some of that. Bish, bash, push. What you looking at? Have some of that. Bish,